everybody to the India Inkblot test, where we're going to be talking about mental health and comics. You have today in front of you an illustrious panel, an amazing panel. I'm going to get out of the way very, very quickly right after I introduce them to you. And the other thing I want to say is, this is very much, this topic is so personal and so communal. I gave the panelists a list of 123 questions that I wanted them to answer before coming here. But rather than have me sit here and ask them these questions and have the staff bolt the door and keep you here till 6 p.m., I think what I'd love to do is have you come up and ask questions partway through the hour. So if you have anything that you would like to ask these panelists, please start thinking about it now, because I will be giving you ample time to answer questions. Now, our guests today, our speakers today, like I said, it's an incredible panel. This is an incredible opportunity. We're going to start with Janina Scarlett, who writes at the site Superhero Therapy. She is also I want to make sure I get everything correct, a licensed clinical psychologist, scientist. She teaches at Alliant International University here in San Diego, and has a book coming out soon called Superhero Therapy, coming out next year. Next is Gail Simone, who I should say in the comics community needs no introduction, but I'm going to give it anyway. She is a renowned comics writer. She's written, of course, Batgirl, Deadpool, Secret Six, Birds of Prey, an incredible advocate for diversity in comics, and just a fantastic, and has a story connected to mental health in comics that I think you'll want to hear. Next is Drea Letamendi, who has worked with Gail on, is actually in the comics Batgirl's psychologist. So this is an incredible privilege, direct from the pages of Batgirl. She is appearing here. And she also has a podcast. Let me just get the title. Okay, she has a podcast called The Arkham Sessions, where she talks about the psychological analysis of Batman, the animated series. Next, we have Bill Posios, who is with Broadcast Thought, and at the end, also Praveen Kambam and Eric Bender. They run a consulting firm for whose goals extend to the shifting the paradigm of how the media and entertainment industries portray mental illness. They consult for media companies on this particular topic, and Bill also has the added sort of bonus of being a comics creator himself, with the character Aura, who I believe you may have seen. I see he's getting the mic.
The comics have a better fate than the U2 album that was given out.
And also Jenny Jaffe, who you may have heard of this past week, whose organization, Project, UROK, or UROK, is both, either one, has been getting a tremendous amount of press this week for the excellent work that it has been doing in the area of promoting awareness among youth of mental health issues. If you haven't seen the video with Will Wheaton or Mara Wilson, you need to see them now. Just Google Project UROK, presented as one word, and you'll find them pretty quickly. So, welcome everybody to this panel, and I want to start with Janina. One of the things about this topic of mental health, that it is not, you can think of it in a couple ways. You can think of it in a very clinical, sort of dispassionate way, or you can also think of it in a very personal way. And I found that reading Janina's site, it's an incredibly personal site, and you can make some intense connections with this topic. And like every superhero, there's an origin story, and I'd like to hear Janina tell hers.
So I was born in Ukraine, and this is my first memory. I was just a little bit shy of 3 years old, and it was May Day, so May 1st, and it was our kind of like Labor Day. It's a really big holiday. So my parents and I went out to the parade, and my father put me on his shoulders. I was holding a red balloon, because I like the color red, and it was a lot of fun. And then there was a scream to my left. I think it was a woman screaming. And when I turned, I saw a different woman convulsing on the ground. I didn't know what was happening. I just know I was scared. And I still remember that fear. And some people ran to call the paramedics. And then suddenly other people started collapsing. And some of them were convulsing as well, and some of them just weren't moving. And we didn't know what was going on. My father kept me on his shoulders. My parents held hands, and they ran home. It wasn't for a few days later that we found out that about a week prior to the parade, there was a big explosion in a town just a few towns away from us called Chernobyl. And what was happening is that people were being affected. And as a result of all that massive radiation exposure, a lot of us were experiencing a lot of health problems for a long time. When I first came to the United States, radiation wasn't something a lot of people knew about, so I was bullied for a while because people thought I would be contagious or radioactive. And, you know, to this day, I'm still waiting for my spidey senses. So for the longest time, I really felt like a freak. And all of that changed when I saw X-Men. And just to be able to identify with people that have had some kind of a different origin, some kind of a struggle that maybe felt like they were different, felt like they were mutated somehow, and yet were able to do something really powerful with it, gave me the inspiration I needed to come to this field and to try to do something like this for other people.
So Janita has been working with people with PTSD, so in a way, her experience is now helping, benefiting others, and applying superheroes to their mental health. Now, Gail and Drea have an incredible experience with this topic because they have actually been integrating that into Gail's work. So I wonder if you could talk about that experience.
Sure. Do you want to go first and then I'll go? And
sure.
We'll kind of like do the Rashomon thing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's still very surreal. But Gail had reached out to me and she had some questions about an important story that she was writing for the New 52's Batgirl. And at the time, we had known that the Batgirl's trauma, which I know many people are familiar with, the traumatic event where the Joker shot her, still was in her history. And Gail was crafting this really wonderful story following that in the New 52 arc, where she would experience a recovery process, it was a physical, psychological recovery that she was interested in getting some consultation and some insight, and it was such a pleasure and honor to be involved in that process. And it's an example of how a writer can reach out to professionals and ask important questions related to, you know, what would a mental health therapist say to a person who's experienced traumatic stressor? What would that intervention look like? Even to details, you know, what would that dialogue be? What would be in the office? What would they be wearing? And I think that attention to detail, that carefulness was incredibly important because the story, and I'll let Gail talk about what came from it, the story was so accurate and it championed mental health, and it portrayed a superhero asking for help and receiving mental health treatment. I think it's one of the few stories that really represent mental health and psychological intervention with that level of accuracy and representation and validity. It's that validation that if a superhero can do this, then, you know, many of us who are experiencing mental health problems or wondering if they should go ask for help are connecting to that and really believing that, okay, that could be me. I could reach out and ask for help too.
Well, and for me, what started the whole thing is, I don't know how many people are familiar with Barbara Gordon, Batgirl, Oracle. Okay, so most people in here are. And when the New 52 was going to happen, Barbara Gordon was going to be taken out of the wheelchair and become Batgirl again and be active physically in that way. And DC had asked me numerous times prior to the New 52 if I would like to, you know, take Barbara Gordon out of the wheelchair, have her stop being Oracle and be Batgirl again. And I never felt the time was right. But when the New 52 happened, and it was going to happen with or without me, I decided all the characters were going to get a reboot and kind of go back to their beginnings, and it kind of made sense. But I told them I would only do it if we didn't wave a magic wand and have her just magically recover from her illness and her, you know, being paralyzed, and just all of a sudden be okay and not talk about it. That I really wanted it to be a realistic process of her recovering and having to deal with that post-traumatic stress that's a result of, you know, her home invasion and the violence that was committed upon her. And when I first heard about Andrea, I was really excited. I was like, oh, a psychologist that likes comics. This couldn't be more perfect. And then when I met her, and she, you know, well, I didn't know it was her at first because I turned around and there was this like badass steampunk huntress standing there. She's like, oh, I'm Andrea. And I'm like, oh, you know, I just felt so that it was such a gift to be able to have somebody who knew comics, who knew, you know, this particular topic of post-traumatic stress, to be able to reach out and for her to take her time so that we could take Barbara Gordon through this process in the most realistic way. And I think that has affected a lot of people in a lot of different ways. I have some stories I'll tell a little bit later about that have come back to me, but also for me to learn the realistic process, the treatment, and to try to portray that in a realistic way, and a lot of people connected to that.
Well, speaking of connection, I want to go one step down the line and talk to Jenny. Because Jenny, we've seen so far the power of stories, the story's effect on Janina, the story integrating this aspect into the actual characters that you read in comics. And I'm wondering what your experience has been, Jenny, with the stories that you tell. Are they having an effect on the people who watch them? And what's been your experience?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for having me at Redhead Con. Second, I was diagnosed very young with OCD, generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and depression. And I was fighting sort of an uphill battle against those most of my life. And I am, full disclosure, I'm not super well versed in comics universes, but I took so much solace in Doctor Who, in Star Trek, in Star Wars, in fantasy worlds. And I think I spend a lot of time escaping. And what I found, the older I got, was that the less I tried to escape from my story and the more I tried to embrace it and tell it openly and often, the more people were opening up to me in return. And it was this amazing, so my background is in comedy, and I got into comedy because I wanted to give people the same escape that comedy gave me. But I eventually ended up writing this article for XOJ about my experiences in exposure therapy for OCD, and I got the most incredible positive response. Which I'm a woman on the internet, and I'm a woman who's been in comedy videos. There are no positive responses. But everybody responded, and not only did they respond, they wanted to tell me their story. It was a lot of, I have no idea, me too. So what I wanted to do was to create a platform to give other people the experience that I've had, where opening up doesn't mean immediate isolation. It means you become part of a community, and I really think that fans of communities are some of the best mental health support communities out there. People go there, they're very honest, they make friends. So we're harnessing the communities that really already existed on places like YouTube, like Tumblr, like the good parts of Reddit, and we are trying to do just some very open and honest story time with people, and it's been unbelievable. I mean, Will Wheaton hugged me last night. This has been a really great time. Is that?
That's perfect.
Was that
Anything that ends with a Will Wheaton hug is a good story. Moving on with the list, I want to talk to the folks from Broadcast Thought. You know, like I said, Bill has the unique experience here of being a psychiatrist who has also written a story extending that into his work. And we also have Eric and Praveen. I want you to talk a little bit about your experiences in this topic, maybe what brought you into this area and some of the things that you've seen in your work.
Well, I'll start off, and I've been a comic book fan since I was about 5 years old. So part of me has always wanted to write a comic book myself. What you have before you, we left some copies of Rise #2 from Northwest Press. It's Rise, Comics Against Bullying. And in there you'll find a short story. It's only 4 pages long, but it's called Aura, and it's about a superhero who has bipolar disorder. Now, you won't find very many superheroes who are depicted as having a mental health disorder. And I thought it was really important to show that heroes, people with mental health issues can be heroes as well. And I wanted to reflect reality. It's just a surprising statistic. Does anyone know in someone's lifetime what is the percentage of people who would have a mental health disorder?
30%.
Yeah, so that's in the ballpark. It's much higher than people might think. In any given year, 1 in 3 Americans can be diagnosed with a mental health condition. There's a lot of the percentage of people with mental health disorders is much higher than we think. So I wanted to reflect that in the comic book, and Aura, to me, came about when I saw there was essentially a call for submissions for this anthology, and I just took the opportunity and ran with it, and I'm really looking forward to writing more stories featuring this character, and delving into some of the issues regarding mental health stigma and how that affects people seeking treatment, and again, reinforcing the idea that people with mental health disorders can be heroes as well.
Excellent. Now, Eric and Praveen, I want to hear a little bit more from you. We've heard a number of people sharing their origin stories and how this has worked for them, both in terms of experience in their lives and how they've tried to share it with others. What do you see as going into a really good depiction of mental health in a comic story?
So just to clarify, because when you say what do you see going into, you mean actually what are the ingredients?
Yeah, what makes for? Like we've had, I know we've had, some of you may have seen, how many of you have seen the movie Inside Out? Wow. Okay. So we know that there are people out there who are trying to integrate this into their entertainment. I'm just sort of, what sort of ingredients do you see as going into a really good integration of, positive integration of mental health into a comic story?
I think the word you just used, integration, is a really good story. This is a part of someone, their mental illness is a part of a person, a whole person. And I used to dread when I was a kid watching TV. There was a very special episode or something, very isolated and very weird and different about it. So when you can integrate this element of the character as part of the character, I think that makes a good story. But it has to be, in my opinion, it has to be some accuracy because of the way the audience relates to that character. So if it's something way out there and off, I think it isolates more people than actually resonating with them. So to me, there's an integration that has a level of accuracy that people can respond to. And Inside Out is a great example. Even last week, I was seeing a teenager who said, I really identified with the mood characters. And it's great to use that to open up a conversation with patients and to be able to, even adults, some people think it's only children, but I've had adults say, I kind of feel like Luke Skywalker, I have to save my father. And that opens up a huge door in terms of therapy. So I think something that relates to people, integration and a bit of accuracy, that can really make a good story.
Yeah, the key is, I think it has to be a win-win for everybody. So from a mental health side, obviously there's goals we want for the good of our society. We want to reduce barriers, we want to reduce stigma. But from a creator's perspective, a publisher's perspective, or especially on the executive side, it's got to sell, right? So the money runs everything, but it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive goals. And I think we're seeing a lot more of that in more modern times now. You can get really extreme depictions that may be not accurate at all. You make these kind of use mental illness as kind of a scary explanation for villains. But as Eric said, that only can get a certain group, and that would marginalize a lot of folks. And I think what we're seeing, Gail and Andrea had a great example of this, is you can have accurate depictions that are hugely entertaining. And I believe that it could be a situation where more nuance is added to the character. I mean, after all, when we talk about mental health issues and the clinicians on staff, basically, we're dealing with people's stories, their life stories, kind of helping them along their journey. And what we look at in fictional works is people's stories, their origin. We want to see how this character gets make it be what obstacles they face, how they overcome those things. And that can mirror real life. I mean, obviously, we're not going to do an extra special episode or make it boring, but I think if you integrate it in, it can be a win-win for both sides. And I think that's the key is, I think, selling it in a way where it's actually helpful for the creators and the publishers. And I think that can be done.
This got me thinking something with respect to Gail's conversation about what she did with the Batgirl. Now, we've had several people talking about the extra special episode thing, sort of the difference between something being educational and entertaining, and in some ways there's a giant gulf fixed between the two, often in our minds and often in our experience. I'm wondering with Gail, when you're writing these characters, do you think of them as role models? Do you find that sort of concept helps or hurts? Is it, do you think about your readers and what sort of effect it could have on them, or is it purely character driven? What goes into that process?
It's kind of like all of those things, and it depends on the character, because some characters I don't want to write as role models. But in this particular case with Barbara Gordon, I've always felt no matter whether she was Batgirl or Oracle or Batgirl again, that she needed to remain an highly intelligent character and a character that does inspire people to do good by her example. And so definitely with, creating her for the New 52, that was definitely on my mind, is that I wanted her character to show that despite difficulties that you may have to work through, that she was not going to let that stop her from doing good in the world, from doing what she thought her place in the world was, whether she was Oracle and had to do it differently, or whether she was Batgirl and did it in this other way. And that was very much on my mind in creating this storyline with the New 52 Batgirl, and that's why I wanted it to be as accurate as possible, to be as real as possible, and to make sense and not be, a magic fix. Mm-hmm. And I think that looking back on that, it has been a gateway for quite a few people to relate to her having gone through a post-traumatic or a traumatic incident and then having to work through and regain her life after that.
And I think that point about the question that she may have and wrestle with, can I be a good person? Something bad happened to me. Can I still be a good person? And that is such a very common internal fear that people who have experienced traumatic stress have, and it's a very real fear. When we connected, I'd wrapped up a rotation at the Veterans Hospital. I worked with a lot of women who had experienced military sexual trauma, and a lot of men who had come back from their deployments who had experienced both physical and psychological injury. And it's a very difficult thing to dismantle, the idea that I did something, I was involved in something that was very damaging and very negative and hurtful, and yet I'm supposed to believe that I'm still a good person, or I'm supposed to believe that I can do good. And that process of recovery includes those kind of cognitive reshaping and emotional growth from that. And the reason why I absolutely appreciate that the traumatic stress wasn't wiped away from Batgirl's history is because we can't do that. We can't wipe away trauma. We can't say, well, that never happened to me. So many people live with it. And I think that's one of the most important, and I think parts of her story is recovery from that and still living with that history and being a good person.
And showing that it may drop into her life unexpectedly at any moment, but she still needs to, be able to carry on with what she feels that her duty is in Gotham and in her life and within her family and everything, and to show that it didn't, even though she was working through the post-traumatic stress, it didn't completely go away. It's still there.
And the villain in the associate was named Mirror, so I thought that was perfect.
And Jenny, you work with PTSD as well. Can you talk a little bit more about your experiences?
Sure. I work with active duty Marines with PTSD at Camp Pendleton. And similar to what Andrea was talking about with veterans, a lot of times the trauma essentially strips away a person's identity. And I get a lot of Marines telling me that coming to therapy and talking about what happened to them and actually connecting with that experience is scarier than anything that they had to face overseas. And at the same time, this is exactly what overtime allows them to heal. I was working with a sailor at one point who was wounded in combat and as a result was on the wheelchair and struggled with feeling or believing, having a thought that he's broken. He had a 1-year-old son, and this sailor believed that he no longer could be the kind of superhero dad that his son deserved. And actually, I brought in Batgirl to therapy, and we talked about Batgirl and what she was going through and how her own beliefs kind of for a while really affected her and her own recovery. And I remember the look on that sailor's face when he came in and he said that for the first time he played catch with his son. He was in a wheelchair and his son was running around and he just let himself go. He allowed himself to chase his son and they had the best time. And he said that that was the first time he felt like a superhero dad again. So thank you, Gail, for that.
I think that I've had some of my most emotional times regarding this Batgirl story and her arc. And I was in a convention in Baltimore not too long ago, and the panel was over, and this very fit, good-looking guy came up to the table, just at the end of the thing, and he says, Gail, can I talk to you for a second? And he looked kind of nervous, a little bit troubled, and I'm like, sure, what's up, and he said, I just have to tell you how much you mean to me and how much this Batgirl story means to me, because I'm a veteran and I suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, and I have had so many times where I just wanted to end it. I just didn't think I could go on anymore. It was too much. And when I found this Batgirl story, the only thing that kept me from doing something really bad was I wanted to know what was going to happen to Batgirl next month. So each month it was a new, I'm going to wait a month. And this gave him the time to also work through what he needed to work through. And I'm still in contact with him. And he was in he's a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne in Iraq and went through some really devastating things. And then it caused devastating things to happen in his personal life as well. But this one connection that he was able to make with this story and how Batgirl might be handling what she had gone through is what gave him the time that he needed to work through it and not take his own life. And I made it through that story without crying. That's the first time. Because it was just, so impactful for me because I hadn't heard his story before, and coming up and just saying this really, made a difference in my life. And I think that when we're dealing with fiction and writing characters that have, mental illnesses or certain things that they need to work through and deal with, that is on my mind that someone may connect with it. I don't really write stories thinking, I'm not writing a story thinking that that's going to affect it. I'm not preaching or anything like that, but I think when you write an honest version of these things, that there's going to be a connection, and it's the same thing I think with other types of diverse characters, and that we're writing about now, which is an exciting time for comics, that we're getting more and more diversity. But I do think we need to do a lot of work in this particular area, because we've had too many years, like 70 years of storytelling where, you know, mental issues are equal villainy, basically. And, you know, we don't have a lot of good examples of heroes and people who can do things and live their life who aren't the villain of the story. And I try to be really careful with that with my book Secret Six, because those characters have all kinds of issues that they're working through, but they come together and form kind of their own family and their own support system and work through things, sometimes successfully and sometimes not. But I think the point is to try to be honest and with that and try to tell an entertaining story at the same time.
I want to throw it up in questions, but before, I have one last thing for Jenny, because one of the things that amazes me about this discussion, quite frankly, is that we're talking about it. When I was growing up, it was very much something that was the other, and something that the thought that, say, any of us would come up and tell our stories was not something you would generally do at the neighborhood drugstore. Is there a difference in the generations that you see in sort of openness in regard to these issues? I'm talking to Jenny in particular, since you work with so many youth and young people.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I think this generation of teenagers is the most phenomenal, socially aware, active, awesome, insightful young people that have maybe ever existed. I was a teenager not too long ago, and I was terrified of everything. And not just because of my anxiety, but because the world that the internet has opened up to people was still starting to form. And this is as recently as 10 years ago, when I was really in the thick of everything I was going through. We didn't have YouTube to turn to. We didn't have the online communities that are able to exist now. So it's amazing to me how much more open young people are. When I was 16, I would never have talked about this. If you had told me I was going to be here today, I wouldn't have believed it, because I wouldn't have believed I was speaking publicly about my mental illness, and I wouldn't have believed I'd still be alive. So the fact that I am both is like, and it's actually what Gail said, the advice I give people is pick something to live for. And for me, it was like the next episode of The Daily Show. And I told somebody yesterday I used to dread Pirate Roberts myself. I would say, good night, sleep well, I'll probably kill you in the morning, but you have to make it to the next Daily Show. So I think it's amazing that this comics art is a serialized, wonderful fantasy world to dissolve yourself into. And submerge yourself is probably the correct word.
Dissolve yourself if you're Grant Morrison, maybe.
On that, any questions? Anybody want my word? Okay, I will start here.
My question is, especially in this time of, there's all these welcoming and supportive, groups and organizations and places. How do you balance the message of you are wonderful and you are okay and you're perfect the way you are and also recovery is really important. And it's important to take care of yourself and don't just accept how you are if you're unhappy and miserable. So how do you put out that message?
Anyone?
This is something that I work in a lot. I think there's an idea that there's something selfish about taking care of your mental health. And I think it's really easy to think, I have it, there are other people in the world who have it much harder. And I think that sometimes the best way to think about it, and sometimes the way you just have to think about it, is this is going to be a selfless act. Because if I become a mentally healthy person, if I take charge of my life and live a good, happy life, that is one more person living, one more wonderful, aware person who can then go out and help the rest of the world. So it's about simultaneously saying your mental illness or your whatever personal struggle you're going through is not your weakness, but it also is not your responsibility to continue living it for whatever perceived responsibility you think you have. It's in a lot of ways, I think it is your superhero origin story, because you're going to get through this, and then you're going to just have this like unshakable core of like, that didn't take me down, and this isn't going to take me down, and the next thing won't take me down either. So, self-care is not selfish.
Do you need to go to work after?
Yes, and kind of following up with what Jenny was saying, we can use that kind of self-care, we can use self-compassion to connect with our core values. The question is always, if you could be a superhero today, what kind of superhero would you want to be? And self-compassion is actually one of those superhero tools that we can use to better ourselves, to get the resilience that we need to then help others. So acceptance is important, and so is self-care.
There's a question behind. And then, you.
Okay. So, even though I'm San Diego born, this is my first Comic-Con in about 15 years that I've been able to get tickets for, and this is my first ever as press. So by rights, I should be, like, out of my mind, excited and thrilled. And yet, this whole weekend, I've been struggling a whole lot with depression, anxiety, feeling lonely. And I hear a lot that, people read comics and stuff to escape what they feel. But my thing is, when I'm upset, if I try to read a comic or anything like that, I don't even see it. Like, I cannot get engaged with it. So, do you ever have that problem, and how do you get over it?
Bill?
Anyway.
Yeah, well, so when it's not uncommon for people who are anxious or are having issues with depression to have trouble concentrating on what they're doing, and have trouble enjoying what they're doing. Obviously, I'm not your doctor, and I can't give you any kind of medical advice, but if you do, if this is something that you haven't discussed with somebody, then, hopefully we can encourage you to do so.
Okay.
How do some Andrea?
I think sometimes when we're in situations where there's this expectation that we all should be having fun, and we all, everyone is ecstatic. Everyone, this is our nerd prom, or this is our nerd party. We sometimes don't realize that it comes with other aspects of socializing that we may not all be used to, or it could trigger some things that we may not be used to being triggered about. So I think, I just want to say that it could be very natural and normal to be in this wonderful place, and everyone has smiles on their face, and I see Batman and Robin dressed up, and Harley, and I'm loving it, but at the same time, I could feel guilt that I'm not exactly as happy as they are, or I could feel disappointment that I'm not doing everything I wanted to do. And I think it's very natural to feel that way. As far as the comic book escapism, I've heard that it can be a form of both something that people connect to and feel, experience themselves more. It builds self-awareness. And then that piece that you're talking about is escapism and being able to read stories that take them into a fantasy world, and they can experience emotions that they may not have access to in their real life. And so it just may be for you. I mean, it sounds like it's just a matter of what are you into? What are you reading? Get on the floor if you can, and see if you have an opportunity to look at the different diverse stories and books that are out there. And maybe it's about finding the right escape route.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate what Andrea said, that there are normal bumps in the road. Okay, life isn't always smooth sailing. So not to over medicalize what you may be experiencing, but yeah, I mean, trust me, I was anxious coming here. Okay, putting this panel together. And sometimes when I see the crowded halls of the con floor, I start to get anxious. So yeah, I mean, this is a great and wonderful place, but there are also things that we all have to deal with in our own way in different degrees.
I want to. There was a woman in white. I'm pointing at you right now.
Yes. Actually, the question is tonight over here. If they're filling up food, if they're not at yet, or filling up food, that's okay. I'll try to figure this about crying. But basically, I've noticed that in comics, a lot of mentally ill characters are villains, and they're like villains of the week that need to be like destroyed for the good of
So it's a very obvious like coupling of villainy and mental illness. And so I'm a bit of a goody two-shoes. I want to be a knight. I want to be a superhero. So I guess my question is the trend of making mentally ill superheroes, is it coming, or are we going to have to wait forever?
Gail? Sorry, Gail and Nadine?
I'm really glad you asked that question. I just want to tell you guys a quick anecdote. So I see kids and adults clinically in addition to the forensic work we do. I was seeing a teenager. She was about 14. Newly diagnosed with a psychotic disorder, so probably was going to be schizophrenic. And she missed a couple of appointments with this community agency, various things. She was able to start treatment. She finally came in and had a heart-to-heart talk with her. And she was scared. She asked me this question, which just broke my heart. She said, "Am I going to grow up and be a serial killer?" I was like, "Well, where did you get that idea?" No, it is. I mean, how did that come from? And she got that actually from horror movies. And what you asked really gets to my heart of these things. So I'm glad you asked that question. And it is really unfortunate when you see it hurt people in that way. I think that's why better depictions really matter. When you see that from your eyes, and people don't realize that some people don't intuitively know that people can't fly, but not everyone has that same intuitive knowledge about mental illness. And so these kinds of depictions can slowly affect how people believe reality is. And that has real impacts, because if you look at a lot of the stigma research and surveys, people get discriminated against. They're not hired for jobs. People don't want to live next door. All kinds of things happen. And we can't have that. I mean, other areas of our society are moving forward in terms of civil rights, and gay rights, gender issues, etc., racial, ethnic issues. But mental illness somehow hasn't made that jump.
I want to get Gail's thought on this.
Here's the thing. I've been guilty of taking that easy way out in my early career because that was the comics that I grew up on. But here's the thing. To make change, you got to have people be involved in that change. And that comes from all sides of it. It comes from you guys speaking out, using your purchasing dollars to purchase the things that are reflecting what you want to read about, what you want to learn. It's us as creators making those choices. I get so tired of hearing, well, we need to just let these things organically happen. They do not freaking organically happen. People make them happen, and they make those choices. And, there's a lot of money tied up in Gotham City and all the Batverse, which I'm a huge fan of. I love it. But there's a lot of weird, when you take it as a whole, there's a lot of weirdness going on the reflection of, who the villains are. And, I personally think Batman might be just as mentally ill in a lot of ways. But that's beside the point. And if the mainstream isn't going to do it quickly enough, then we need to go outside the mainstream and do it, and they will catch up eventually. But that's one reason why I've made the choice recently to start creating my own properties now, because some of this change is just taking too freaking long. And I appreciate being, knowing these people and knowing the work they do, and that they read comics and love comics, and they can see how media can affect change and help change. But you guys have to help it along too, and don't be afraid to make your voices heard and your dollars go where you want them to.
I've been given, unfortunately, I've been given the cue that we have to wrap this up. But I just want to say this.
You should also write to the publisher when they do a story that you like, and tell them that you like that story, so that they know.
And that's just in keeping with I think one of the themes of this panel. One of the themes of this convention is that we are not just consumers here, we're a community, and everybody has a voice. And so I hope that even after this panel is over, it's not really over. I hope that you look for the websites and the books by all of these people. Keep in touch. There's a lot of good material here to read, to discuss, and to make a part of your life. So I want to thank you all for being part of this panel, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.